All right, I'm gonna start this video with a pretty bold claim. I think this is the best piece of furniture I have ever made, and it just might be the best piece of furniture in the entire world. But we all know the old saying, the road to success is paved with failure.
That's not supposed to be like that. The wheels are starting to come off.
Okay, this is the old record player cabinet thing I built years ago. And we all know the old saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And this record player cabinet thing ain't broke, but that doesn't mean I can't fix it, because sometimes things aren't necessarily broken, but they can definitely be better, which is exactly what we're going to do today.
All right, figured I'd give you a little quick backstory on this piece. I made it probably 7, 8 years ago. It's got record player, auxiliary input, and it's got Bluetooth. Everything in here I wired myself. It was like a total experiment. I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to this stuff. So we're gonna open this up, look at the rat's nest of wires and everything in here. Hopefully there aren't any actual rats, but we'll see.
So when I first built this record player cabinet thing, it's not like I set out to specifically make it complicated, but in kind of a roundabout way, that's exactly what happened. I wanted specific functionality with all the audio input options and being able to switch between them and multiple speakers. I liked the aesthetic of this kind of control panel switchboard thing, but because I had and still have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to wiring electronics, it quickly became way more complicated than I had initially thought or wanted. I'm actually still amazed that I got it all to work and it still works, but it's just one of those things that's always bothered me, and I was just never really happy with the final outcome. So when I set out to build this new version, I promise I didn't plan on building the best piece of furniture in the world, but I realized that I achieved 3 things, and these are actually the 3 things that you need to create the best piece of furniture in the world. And the first of those 3 things is simplicity. With the first record player, I bought all the components separately and then connected them all together myself. Record player, auxiliary input, Bluetooth, connected to power switches, LEDs, selector switches, potentiometers, and all of that was connected to an amp and connected to multiple sets of speakers, and everything had a whole mess of wires in between. For this one though, with the goal of simplicity in mind, I decided to buy an existing simple record player that I could hopefully transfer all the guts out of and into my new cabinet, then use a standalone speaker. I didn't need multiple inputs or Bluetooth or a separate amp because the record player and the speaker had all of that already integrated into them. So I basically went from this mess to this, which is objectively more simple.
All right, so I'm taking apart this record player, which is nerve-wracking in general. It's brand new, wasn't cheap, and everything came out really easily, except for the very last component. I'll show you. So all this stuff came out super easy, but then this, I have the wire that connects to that board under there. So if I were more confident in my soldering skills, I would probably remove the wires from the board with a soldering iron, resolder them back in place once I have built my portion. So I'm gonna try and figure out a way to do it where I don't have to disconnect any wires. But first predicament of probably many to come.
And so when you're facing a predicament, you can ask yourself, are you a Riggs or are you a Murtaugh?
Well, I'm thinking we should cut the blue wire.
Hey, wait!
What?
That's not what I'm thinking.
What? Do you think maybe the red?
No!
All right, this is incredibly nerve-wracking, but this is what I've decided.
For this one, I guess I decided on both because I cut all the wires, which, note to self, get better at soldering tiny wires before we put this thing back together. So, worrying about that is for future Shaun, and for now I could focus on some woodworking, which I am better at, I think. That being said, I don't often bust out the calipers in my woodworking, but I essentially needed to duplicate the factory plinth. Side note on that, this part of a record player is called a plinth, and I think rightly so assumed all of these measurements needed to be pretty accurate, so calipers it was. Which is also why I decided to let my trusty CNC machine do the cutting. Hey everybody, real quick, I want to take a minute to thank FlexiSpot for sponsoring today's video. I'll be honest, I never really considered myself a recliner guy, but when FlexiSpot sent me their XL6 power recliner and I gave it a sit, it was so comfortable that I might actually be a recliner guy. The backrest and footrest are independently powered, so you can adjust the chair to just about any position you'd like, and you can even lay it completely flat. The entire chair also lifts up to make getting in and out of it a lot easier, so if you or someone in your house needs a little help, this is a great feature. I just turned 40 earlier this year, so I don't mind a little extra help. On top of that, it also has built-in heating and massage. In addition to the chair, they also sent me the FlexiSpot Japanese Joinery Bed, which I've been sleeping on for a couple months now, and I've been loving it. I was pleasantly surprised at how simple it is to put together, and you can do it all with no tools. All the pieces just slide and lock together, kind of like a puzzle, and once it's set up, it feels super solid. The wooden slats attached to the frame with Velcro strips, which means no noisy squeaking, and the inward recessed legs let you slide the bed right up against the wall without scratching anything or hitting your toes. All of these features, along with the fact that it's made from solid rubber wood with a scratch and moisture resistant finish, means you get a super solid bed that's durable and will still look great after months of use. So, if you're interested in a new bed or recliner, click the link in the description and use my code Shaun to get an extra $20 off the Kana Japanese Joinery Bed or U3 Hybrid Mattress, or use the code YTBXL650 for $50 off the Power Lift Recliner during FlexiSpot's Black Friday sale. Like I mentioned, links, codes, details are all in the description. All right, thanks FlexiSpot.
All right, so I did a test cut here on some plywood. I actually did two. There's the first one, and it was unsuccessful. I thought about doing a third test just to make sure everything was dialed in, but I thought, why not just send it? As usual, I'm not totally confident, but actually I feel good about it. Knock on some wood. I feel good about it though, so let's see how it goes.
If you've watched seriously almost any video where I use a CNC machine in the past, you'll know I don't have the best luck. I somehow seem to always be able to make it work in the end, but almost never without some sort of issue coming up. So I really have no idea why I had so much confidence going into this one, but at least I did knock on wood. That's a good start.
That's not supposed to be like that. So, as you can see, it got messed up. I don't know. I feel like I've done everything to try to mitigate these issues, and it just keeps happening. So,
luckily, and trying to look on the bright side here, the cut was almost finished and there were only a couple small holes left that needed to be drilled, and I could pretty easily do those by hand. So I'll chalk it up as a success, but I will say, and I'm talking to you, my CNC is right behind the camera, I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed. Every time. So, I got a fresh batch of lumber from Woodworker Source. Go check them out if you don't feel like driving to the lumberyard. And I could get started on all the main parts of the cabinet. I'm using red oak for the cabinet and walnut for the shelves. one of which is the plinth that we had just finished. So first order of business was to cut up and mill the red oak into roughly sized sections that would make up the 2 side panels and the top and bottom panels. And I wanted all of this to be 1.5 inches thick. I don't usually talk about dimensions in my videos, especially when they're kind of inconsequential, but this dimension is important, so remember this one. All right, we know what's going on with all the internals for this piece, all of the electronics, and we know that the cabinet is going to be made with 1.5 inch thick material. But what else do we have going on? Thank you for asking. If you're a child of the 80s or 90s, you probably recognize one of these. I know there's a lot of furniture that really kind of screams the time period that it comes from, but nothing puts me into a more specific moment in my life than looking at a stereo like one of these, which meant I had to come up with my own version, my own spin on this idea. An integrated record player on top, the speaker and electronic components all hidden in this middle section, and record storage in the bottom. And I knew I had to use tinted glass, that's kind of the main thing. And I was also on the fence about adding some LED lighting, but that's kind of the general idea for now. All right, so 4 panels made, all of which look to be 1.5 inches thick on camera, I guess. But now I needed to cut the miters for the top and bottom panels to create whatever shape you call this, so that eventually I could achieve this curved detail on all the corners. And some of these details are another reason why this is the best piece of furniture I've ever made. Not specifically the actual details I'm incorporating into this design, but the fact that I'm getting to take an existing design and make it better with some new details. I assume no one wants to see me make tiny incremental changes to a design over many, many years until I've absolutely perfected it. So instead, I design something, then live with it and slowly start to think about it over the course of those many years until I'm finally ready to make a version 2, which can sometimes be significantly different from the original version, but usually there's some carryover of the design ideas from the original, which is always pretty cool to see. This piece, for example, is keeping similar proportions for the cabinet dimensions. Both of them are approximately 30 inches tall. And remember that 1.5 inch thick material that I said was so important?
Okay, so hit another little snafu here, and I feel a little dumb. So don't rub it in too much. But the top and bottom pieces, and then the side parts, I was feeling good, and then I realized all of that material for those parts I had milled to 1.75 inches, and my original design was for them to be 1.5 inches thick. Doesn't really seem like it's a big deal, and I probably could just keep moving along. But there's a couple things that it will affect down the line. Yeah, let's see how this goes.
Luckily, I have a 16-inch wide planer, and all of my panels were cut to just under 16 inches. So removing some thickness from the flat side panels was as simple as a few passes through the planer. But where things got a little more tricky were the top and bottom panels, because they had already been glued up into whatever shape this is. This meant I needed to remove equal amounts of material in this direction and this direction. So after thinking about it and having a moment of contemplation, I told myself,
Okay, here goes nothing.
And just decided to go for it. I cut the short sides using my table saw, which was a hefty cut, but doable. And as you can see, they were slightly taller than the cut height of my blade, so I could finish them off with a router and a flush trim bit. Weirdly, this all was going surprisingly well so far. I thought I was going to have issues. Then to remove material from the top face, I used the planer again, but I couldn't put them through the planer because of the shape. So I needed a simple sled to basically make a solid flat bottom panel, which allowed them to run through the planer just like any other thick board. And once again, this went shockingly well, and I just planed each one down to the desired dimension. And when I finished that last pass and the edges lined up perfectly right at the miter, I stopped and took a moment and thought to myself, you know, maybe I am good at this woodworking thing. So like I mentioned, the thickness of the panels did affect a couple other design elements in the cabinet, and one of those is the front edge chamfer. I wanted a really big chamfer that left a fairly small flat edge around the front of the cabinet, and if I had left everything a 1/4 inch thicker, that flat edge would have just been wider, and in my personal opinion, worse. So, moral of the story, and you can quote me on this one, because I think it's good. If you designed something a certain way, there was probably a reason for it. So stick with it, even if you screw up and have to do crazy things to make it right. It might seem difficult in the moment, but it'll be worth it in the end. All right, main cabinet parts are mostly done, so I could shift focus to what's going on inside the cabinet, which were the 3 walnut shelves. The top one, the plinth, is already done like we've talked about. So the next one will hold the speaker and all the electronic components, and the bottom one will hold the record storage. And let's be honest with ourselves, shelves are usually one of the less exciting parts of a furniture build. But when it comes to functionality, they actually do a lot of the heavy lifting. But for this one, the shelves are where I'm incorporating one of the more important aspects of this piece, not the shelves themselves, but how the shelves are connected to the rest of the cabinet. And for that, I'm using some Festool connectors. These are basically the Festool version of knockdown furniture hardware, and they're designed to work with the Festool domino. I'm not really looking to take this thing apart a bunch or flat pack it for shipping or anything like that. The reason I wanted to be able to disassemble it is in case anything ever goes wrong. If I were to glue everything together, specifically the turntable plinth, then if I ever needed to repair or replace something, I would be in a very tough spot. I'd basically have to cut apart the entire cabinet. But with this design, I'll be able to take everything apart if I ever need to. I don't really plan on it, but it's nice to have that option. You know, with electronics and things, you never know what's going to happen. And if everyone watching this video wants to buy one, I'm already ahead of the curve when it comes to shipping. But just remember, there is some assembly required, so, you know, consider that when putting in your deposit. And I will say the Festool system is pretty easy. I don't use them often, so there is a little bit of a learning curve every time I bust them out. But once I kind of remember what's going on, it's really as simple as cutting dominoes for anything else. Hey everybody, sorry to interrupt, but you know what time of the year it is. I'll keep it brief because there's really not much to it, but all of our courses, both our furniture build courses and the best beginner woodworking course period, are all on sale. We don't do sales very often, and we certainly don't do any that are this big. So go check them out if you're interested in learning woodworking or taking your skills to the next level. All of the details and links are in the description. All right, thanks for listening. Back to it. All right, I don't really consider myself a polarizing person, but no matter what, there's always a couple things in most builds that start to kind of divide people. And this is the first of a couple of those things for this piece. I'm sure there are plenty of people watching right now that would prefer I left the cabinet with square corners, and I get it, I really do. But one of the best parts about designing and making things is the endless possibilities when it comes to designing and making things. Sometimes when I'm working on a new design, I'll try new details either while I'm sketching or modeling it on my computer. And when I add something, I look at it before and after, and I really just feel if I like it one way or the other. There aren't really any rules when it comes to design, at least none that I'm aware of. So really, what else do I have to go off of besides just how something feels? And it's not like I think this is some kind of unique or groundbreaking idea, but I do get a lot of questions about design process, and I never really know how to answer them. So I guess another way to look at it, it's kind of like if a musician is slightly offbeat or in the wrong key, it might not always be glaringly obvious, but you can kind of feel something isn't quite right. It's that same exact feeling. But I also know that design is subjective. Same exact thing goes for these aluminum spacers. Some will think it's just right. Someone else will think I should have used brass or something else. And both are totally acceptable. And I apologize if I didn't choose your specific preference, but aluminum just felt like it was singing in tune for this one. I'm also not a good musician. I couldn't sing in tune to save my life, so keep that in mind with all of this. All right, remember earlier when I was talking about how I love simplicity and how I'm making this new version more simple than the original one, and because of that, this was the best piece of furniture I've ever made and maybe the best piece of furniture in the world, and also how I was considering adding LED lights? Well, no matter how hard I try to keep things simple, and no matter how much I tried to not add lights, I guess there will always be a small part of me that likes a little complexity, and who doesn't love some LEDs? So let's get lightly complex and work on these lights, which needed a groove cut into the cabinet so I could install them flush.
All right, well, unfortunately, we're at the part of the project where the wheels are starting to come off. So first, I got these little glass hinges. I cut these grooves for these LEDs and totally forgot that I have to mount the hinges exactly where the LED goes. So we're gonna figure it all out because that's the only option.
I guess this isn't a surprise. With complexity comes messing up. But the best part about messing up is figuring out how to fix it. And this one wasn't a huge deal, actually. I just cut and glued in a couple patches to give the hinges a solid place to connect to. Not too bad, but I'll be honest, this was kind of a little taste of things to come. One weird thing about this piece, though, is because I could take it apart and because so much of the final build process was just assembling parts, I decided to sand and finish at this point, kind of mid-build. Sanding and finishing is usually one of the last things to happen, so I won't lie, this felt a little premature, but I was also waiting for the 3 pieces of glass that I ordered to arrive, so I was just trying to kind of keep the momentum moving forward instead of just waiting around. Though, spoiler alert, but also not that surprising, doing things kind of out of order isn't a smart move. Don't ask me how I know, because you're gonna find out shortly. Also, another apology once again to the people that hate when I finish stuff with black polyurethane. I know I said I don't think I'm a polarizing person, but using this finish is definitely as close as I get. Okay, it feels a little weird to say it, but at this point, all I had to do was assemble everything, just put all the parts together. And usually that kind of signals that a build is winding down. Just put in those last couple screws, dust it off, cue the beauty shots. But that wasn't the case for this one. Though I could start the process by installing the aluminum spacers. And if you were one of the few people that watched my last video, you might remember how I was complaining about flathead screws. Why were these ever a thing? And why so many? Well, I got a lot of people explaining why they were a thing, and even more people telling me that they're technically slotted screws. But I still don't like them, except for aesthetics. And because these screws will be seen when the lid of the record player is opened, I decided to use slotted screws for this. I could also install the actual LED lights into those grooves that I cut. I used black channel with black diffusers, hoping that when they're off, they'll just kind of blend in seamlessly with the sides of the cabinet. Then some black friction hinges. I was pretty skeptical about these, and I wasn't sure they were going to be strong enough to hold the fairly heavy top lid open, but I really wanted something super clean and simple and not some weird hinge or some prop mechanism to hold the lid open. So I took a gamble on these, and sure enough, they worked like a charm. All right, too many things just went according to plan. They went too well, so let's mess things up for a minute and install some glass. So just to take full accountability from the start here, this is totally on me, no one else's fault. Like I mentioned, because of timing and not having everything perfectly planned, I had to start building the cabinet before I actually had the glass.
I think it's gonna work.
I also messed up, and when I ordered the glass, I forgot to factor in the height of the hinges. So the issue was the glass hinges I got had quite a bit of clearance needed between the shelf and the bottom edge of the glass. If I had the glass and the hinges before building the cabinet, it would have been super easy to figure out exactly how much space I needed between the shelves. But because I built the cabinet before getting the glass, I put myself into a tough spot. I initially thought I was close enough where I could just drill a hole so this part of the hinge would sit flush, and that would give me the extra clearance I needed. But I quickly realized that it wouldn't be enough, and I actually needed quite a bit more. So my next thought was to create a recess in the shelves, both top and bottom, so the entire hinge would sit lower. And it was starting to look like I was gonna hopefully be able to get this to work.
All right, it's the next morning, but last night I spent a considerable amount of time getting these glass doors fit into place. And to be fair, the glass is cut pretty much to the exact specifications that I asked for, but there was a lot of tweaking basically because I didn't get to do any test fitting or test with glass hinges and figure out exactly how big I needed to make the cabinet. One of those timing things. But I got this one in, I'm gonna put that one in, and then we just gotta assemble the rest of the thing. So moral of the story, have more time.
So I was finally able to get the hinges about as low as they possibly could sit into the shelves. And they finally went into place and were swinging freely. It was still a tight fit, but they worked. And there's actually a silver lining to all of this. Because I had to recess the hinges so much, my glass doors actually fit into the cabinet opening much better than they would have if I left the hinges sitting completely on top of the shelf. The gaps around the doors are way smaller, which in my opinion looks a lot better. And honestly, if I were to use these hinges again, I probably would do the exact same thing. The other tricky part with the glass was the top piece that covers the front of the record player. I measured and ordered a piece that was originally designed to be recessed into the plinth as well as into the lid. But of course, what I forgot about was the lid was already glued into whatever shape this is. So cutting the groove right here was going to be difficult. Because of this, I almost completely abandoned using glass in front of the record player because cutting only a groove into the plinth deep enough to make it work was going to be risky. I was going to be left with a tiny bit of material. But then I said to myself, Come on, Shaun. You can do this, buddy. You're a woodworker, remember? So I rigged up a platform, I guess, for my router and a straight edge and used a long router bit. And luckily I only needed a shallow groove, so I was able to cut it pretty easily once I had everything set up. Then I could square up the ends with a chisel, and it really ended up being not that bad. I don't really know why everyone was freaking out and getting all dramatic about it maybe not working, you know. Relax. All right, the last thing I needed to actually make was the speaker cover. And this part had a few requirements. It needed to be removable. It needed to be acoustically transparent, but visually non-transparent. And it needed to look good. So once again, keeping with the theme of simplicity, I made a very basic rectangular wooden frame, cut it to size, and added a small roundover to the front outside edge. I then got some acoustically transparent, visually non-transparent, good-looking gray fabric and attached it to the frame. I will say, whenever I use fabric or experiment with any sort of upholstery in my projects, I usually get a decent roasting in the comments. Maybe justified, maybe not, but I guess people are just passionate about upholstery. So I did my best to get this one as clean as I possibly could, and apologies to any of my upholstery heads out there if I didn't get this one quite right either. All right, we're finally down to the real exciting parts that are gonna make this a real record player. And the good thing is most of this should be pretty easy.
Off to a great start. Second thing I put in.
Okay, I was only worried about the wiring and having to reconnect those wires that I cut at the beginning, but I guess I should have also been worried about what I thought would be the easiest part of the installation. I won't lie, there was truly a moment after it happened where all the positivity of having the finish line in sight was almost completely dashed. But luckily, there are few things that a little CA glue can't fix. So, crisis averted, back to installing everything into the plinth. And this brings me to my last reason why this is the best piece of furniture I've ever made. This is my own personal thing, but I love when furniture is interactive. It's one thing to have a beautiful table or a comfortable chair, but to have a piece of furniture that moves or lights up or plays music is just one of those things that takes it to a new level for me. And this piece moves, it lights up, and it plays music, so it's hard to argue that this isn't the best piece of furniture I've ever made, and maybe the best piece of furniture in the world. But actually, let's not get ahead of ourselves. We don't even know if it's gonna work yet, because if it doesn't, none of that matters. And I still need to solder the tiniest wires I've ever seen, probably the tiniest wires in the world. I had been thinking about this part for the entire time I had been building this piece, because it would all come down to whether or not I could reconnect these wires, get it all back together and working. Okay, as far as I could tell, all the wires were soldered back together successfully. I will say it was almost too easy, so I either messed everything up or I'm a professional solderer now. Luckily, there was an easy way to find out if I really was successful.
Now is the moment of truth. I'm gonna plug it all in, see if it actually plays a record. So, cross your fingers. Okay, not a total failure. It did not work on the speaker that I bought for it, but I hooked it up to my shop system and it works through that. So I just got to find out what the what the disconnect is between the record player and this newfangled Sonos speaker. I'm hoping that should be not too difficult. So,
okay, not quite the big win I was hoping for, but we were getting there. As far as I could tell, it was a software issue, not a hardware issue. So my professional solderer status was still intact. And I also just might be tech support because all right, I had to cut the audio because I don't own any copyright-free music on vinyl. That would be weird. Also, don't celebrate too early because now I needed to do the final assembly and really see if everything fits, works, and looks good once it's all put together. Luckily, I was pretty positive it was all gonna work out. I had taken this thing apart, put it back together enough times throughout the build to really feel confident that I was gonna reach the finish line. And I will say, I actually really enjoyed the final assembly. Everything was going together super nicely. The doors fit in perfectly. All of the wires and things that had been hanging all over the place were finally tucked away. And who doesn't love the sound of some magnets snapping together? So, is this the best piece of furniture in the world? Of course not. Is this the best thing I've ever made? I don't know. Maybe. I really like it, and I hope you did too. It checks all of the boxes for what I like in a piece of furniture, but it's also the most recent thing I've made, and I always like the newest thing. But at the very least, I'm just glad I don't have to think about the mess of wires that was in that old record player anymore. That alone is enough to make me happy that I built this one. So, thanks for watching. I love you for it. And I hope it all turned out better than you thought, because if this happens to be where the record ends, I'm just glad that we gave it a shot.